Radium is a chemical element. It's the heaviest alkaline earth metal, and it's the only radioactive member of its group. The ionizing radiation emitted by radium bromide excites nitrogen molecules in the air, making it glow. In 1913, the first radium was produced in the United States by Joseph M. Flannery. He was advised by medical specialists in Europe that the properties of radium was to be used to treat his sister's cancer, but the element was scarce, so he focused on moving to the States to produce it there. Joseph was a strong believer in the qualities of radium, even going as far as to place it in his tomato garden thinking it would help it grow. Flannery died in 1920 due to its harmful properties. 3 factories opened in the United States from 1917 to the early 1920s, specializing in painting a self-illuminating substance onto the faces of clocks and watches. These factories hired women from their teens and early 20s to paint the clocks, telling them that there was absolutely nothing harmful about the radium-based paint. As part of their training, the women were instructed to point the tip of their thin brushes by pressing it between their lips, which was a major contributor as to why so many of them ingested the chemical. The reason as why a rag or towel wasn't used was because it wasted too much time and paint, which was made from powdered radium, gum arabic, and water. An estimated 4,000 workers were hired by the corporations in the US and Canada to paint clock faces with the radioactive paint. They would each be given small cubicles and instructed to mix their own paint using camel hair brushes to apply the glowing substance. Scientists within the US Radium Corporation who knew of the effects of radium on the human body were careful to avoid any kind of exposure to the material. Chemists used lead screens, wore masks, and used tongs to handle the radium, while female workers weren't given so much as gloves to protect them from it. Many women in these factories even enjoyed painting the substance onto their nails, face, and teeth, completely unaware that they were painting themselves with harmful radiation. It's unknown how many workers died of exposure to the radioactive paint since 1920. Many of the women began to get sick and suffer from chronic fatigue, paper-thin skin that would split open if scratched by a nail, and a condition later dubbed as radium jaw, an occupational disease brought on by the ingestion and absorption of radium into the bones of radium dial painters. This condition made their jawbone crumble to the touch, as well as bleeding gums and severe distortion of the jaw due to bone tumors. For many of the women like Molly McGee, it started with severe tooth decay. By the time they got to their dentist, their teeth would be rotten to the core and practically falling out, leaving a hole that refused to heal, but instead started sprouting up tumorous lesions. When approached by doctors and dentists about the condition of their workers, the radium companies urged them to keep their mouths shut and the data away from the public. Workers' deaths were then suddenly attributed to other causes such as syphilis in order to slander the reputations of the women. Radium Dial Corporation was opened in Ottawa, Illinois in 1922, taking over the town's former high school. Following in the footsteps of the US Radium Corporation, they hired a women's workforce to paint the clock faces. Like those who had fallen before them, the girls began to get sick, and official reports of radium poisoning surfaced in 1926. The company authorized physicals and other tests designed to determine the toxicity of its employees, but the results of these tests were never turned over to the women or released to the public. They moved forward with their claims that the paint wasn't harming the women, and when asked about the workers in New Jersey who died of radium sickness, employers lied, calling it a viral infection and to return to work as usual. In 1925, the first lawsuit was filed against the US Radium Corporation, but these companies had a major upper hand in handling such cases, claiming that the girls' symptoms weren't all related to one cause, and that radium poisoning wasn't officially a real disease. They purposefully held out courts for months, taking as long as possible until the prosecuting girls died waiting for justice. Even the inventor of radium paint, Dr. Sabin A. von Sochaki, would discover the dangers of his own product. When he got sick from radium in his hands, he offered to help the girls in court. He died in 1928, becoming the 16th victim of his own paint. After 8 appeals, victory finally came in 1939 with the help of a lawyer named Leonard Grossman, working pro bono for the cause, and a former radium dial worker, Catherine Donahue, who was prepared to fight literally to the death for justice. You can look at the poor practices of mankind and blame it on the fact that they didn't know any better back then. But the injustice of this story comes from companies knowing very well that the product they were using actively killed their employees. They did everything in their power to silence and ignore the girls, preying on the poverty of the community since there weren't many jobs for women back then. The Radium girls were so contaminated by the time they died that if you stood over their graves today with a Geiger counter, the radioactive levels would still cause the needle to jump. However, they didn't die in vain, as their plight established the right of individuals to sue for damages from corporations due to labor abuse. Also, as a result of their suffering, workplace safety standards have dramatically increased for many decades.